Nobody builds trucks like this anymore. These 10 Japanese trucks were engineered to survive with nothing electronic to fail, and most are still running today on original parts. Stick around, because the last truck on this list is small enough to fit in a parking space and tough enough to outlast machines 4 times its size. Number 10. Suzuki Carry 4WDK truck. Suzuki fit full-time 4-wheel drive into a truck legally capped at 660 cc and barely over 10 feet long, and the capability to size ratio still doesn't make sense on paper. The Carry and its every badge twin used a compact ladder frame with a genuine low-range transfer case. Engineering usually reserved for far larger trucks, squeezed into Japan's strictest key class size and power regulations. That constraint forced discipline rather than compromise. Every component had to justify its weight and space, which meant nothing extraneous made it into production, and nothing extraneous meant less to eventually break. Mountain farmers across Japan adopted these specifically because the tiny footprint could navigate terraced fields and narrow mountain paths no full-size truck could reach, while the 4-wheel drive system provided genuine traction rather than a marketing checkbox. The quiet payoff of this whole list sits right here. A truck smaller than most parking spaces, built under the tightest regulatory constraints in the industry, has outlasted machines many times its size and price, purely because Suzuki treated every gram and every cubic centimeter as something that had to earn its place. Japan's own vehicle inspection system, which forces owners to prove roadworthiness every few years, has done nothing to thin out the surviving Carry and every population. Decades-old units routinely pass inspection on original mechanicals, which says more about Suzuki's original build quality than any modern marketing claim could. Export markets in Southeast Asia and the Caribbean have kept demand for used Carry, and every truck's high for decades, valuing the same narrow footprint and low-range gearing that made them so effective on Japan's own mountain farms. Smallest truck on this list, but would you trust it over anything bigger here? Comment below. Number 9. Daihatsu He-Jet 4WD. Daihatsu built the He-Jet around one unglamorous goal: keep it running past its expected lifespan with almost no maintenance budget behind it. A simple 2-cylinder or small 4-cylinder engine, basic leaf spring suspension, and an optional 4-wheel drive system gave rural Japanese farmers a truck that tolerated years of neglect between services. That reputation spread well beyond Japan's borders, as export markets discovered the same durability at a fraction of a full-size truck's running cost. Decades-old He-Jets are still commonly found working small farms today, not because owners can't afford something newer, but because nothing about the original truck has actually failed. Southeast Asian and African markets in particular kept importing used He-Jets long after Daihatsu moved on to newer generations, valuing the simple carbureted engines, specifically because they run on whatever fuel quality is locally available. Daihatsu's own dealer network in Japan still routinely services decades-old He-Jets today, a rarity for any manufacturer, largely because the mechanical simplicity underneath never demanded specialized diagnostic equipment to maintain. The 4-wheel drive variant, in particular, earned a reputation in Japan's mountainous prefectures, where narrow terraced access roads made anything larger impractical. Farmers who bought one rarely needed a second truck for the rest of their working lives, since the He-Jet handled everything from hauling feed to navigating flooded rice paddies without complaint. Even Daihatsu's engineers reportedly underestimated how long these trucks would stay in service, designing replacement parts schedules around a lifespan the actual trucks blew past decades ago. That mismatch between expected and actual longevity has become part of the He-Jet's own folklore among Japanese farming communities. Still see old He-Jets running where you live? Tell us where. Number 8. Honda Acti truck. Honda ran the Acti for 44 years without changing its core layout, because nothing about it ever needed fixing. Launched in 1977 as a rear-wheel drive K truck, Honda mounted the engine behind the cab, ahead of the rear axle, rather than copying the underseat layout every competitor used, putting more weight over the driven wheels exactly when traction mattered most. Four-wheel drive arrived in 1983, using a viscous coupling that engaged automatically the moment the rear wheels slipped. No lever, no manual hub lock. Farmers in Japan's mountain regions have run these for decades, specifically because the layout handles loaded, wet, sloped ground, better than machines twice its size. Later generations added air conditioning and disc brakes, but the mid-engine layout and automatic four-wheel drive engagement stayed essentially untouched across 4 decades, because rival K truck makers never found a genuine reason to force Honda off it. Production finally ended in 2021, not because the design had failed, but because Honda restructured its K truck lineup entirely. Even in its last model years, the Acti was still being bought by the same rural buyers who trusted the badge since the 70s. Enthusiast interest in the Acti has grown well beyond its farming origins in recent years, with collectors overseas importing used examples specifically for the mid-engine layout, a configuration no other key truck manufacturer ever fully committed to. Farmers in the comments, is the mid-engine layout actually better once the bed is loaded? Number 7. Toyota Mega Cruiser. Toyota built a Humvee rival for Japan's own narrow roads, and it made almost no sense as a civilian product. The Mega Cruiser launched in 1995 for the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, running portal axles, a permanent four-wheel drive system, and central tire inflation control that let the driver adjust tire pressure for terrain without leaving the cab. Toyota briefly sold a limited civilian version, oversized for a country dominated by K cars and narrow city streets, at a price that guaranteed limited demand from the start. That mismatch was never really the point. The Mega Cruiser existed to prove Toyota could build military-grade durability entirely in-house, matching Humvee-level capability without relying on an imported platform. Surviving military and civilian units remain in service and private hands today, valued specifically because nothing about the drivetrain was built with the lifespan in mind. Civilian examples that reach the used market command prices far beyond what the truck originally cost, simply because so few were built, and even fewer owners are willing to part with one. Disaster response teams in Japan have also continued using surplus units, specifically for the central tire inflation system's advantage on unstable ground. Toyota never built a direct successor, leaving the Mega Cruiser as a genuine one-off in its own lineup, a decision that only added to its reputation as the most overbuilt vehicle the company ever put a civilian price tag on. Would you actually daily drive a Mega Cruiser if you found one? Be honest. Number 6. Nissan Patrol Pickup. Nissan built the Patrol as its answer to the Land Cruiser, and in pickup form it leaned even further into raw mechanical toughness at the direct expense of comfort. A solid front axle, low-range transfer case, and a straightforward inline engine gave the Patrol Pickup crawling ability that mattered more to buyers than a smooth ride ever did. Middle Eastern and African fleets standardized on the Patrol Pickup throughout these decades for exactly the same reason as the Land Cruiser. Remote terrain failure wasn't an option, and Nissan's simple drivetrain meant field repairs rarely needed anything beyond basic tools. The truck's reputation for outlasting harsher climates than it was ever tested in became the whole basis for its export success. Desert heat and sand ingestion killed more sophisticated trucks long before their engines ever wore out, and the Patrol's simple mechanical fuel system and minimal wiring gave it far fewer failure points to worry about. That single advantage kept fleets running years past when comparable European trucks needed replacement. Government fleets across the Gulf states continued specifying older Patrol Pickup variants well after newer generations launched, simply because operators already trusted the exact drivetrain and didn't want to retrain field mechanics on anything new. Patrol or Land Cruiser? Which one actually wins the reliability argument? Number 5. Mitsubishi L200 Forto. Mitsubishi's first generation L200 arrived late to the small truck race and made up for it with chassis engineering built to outlast its rivals rather than outspec them. A conventional ladder frame, leaf springs at both ends, and a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder gave mining and agricultural fleets worldwide a truck that asked for almost nothing beyond routine oil changes. Export markets across Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America adopted the L200 specifically for that unglamorous reliability, running fleets for years past their expected service life in conditions with minimal maintenance infrastructure available. Mitsubishi resisted adding complexity generation after generation because every added feature was one more thing to fail. Somewhere the nearest dealership was hundreds of miles away. Local mechanics across these export markets became genuinely fluent in the L200's mechanical layout, simply through repetition, keeping fleets running with rebuilt parts rather than factory replacements. That informal repair network extended the truck's working life well beyond anything Mitsubishi originally engineered for. Mitsubishi's own parts distribution network in these regions leaned into that reality, stocking common wear items for decades after the first generation L200 stopped being sold new, recognizing the fleet demand simply never disappeared. Anyone still running a first-gen L200 as a daily? Let us know the mileage. Number 4. Isuzu Faster KB. Isuzu built a truck so dependable that other manufacturers wanted their names on it instead of Isuzu's own badge. The Faster launched in 1972, and General Motors immediately licensed the design, selling it in North America as the Chevrolet Elove, and later rebadging it again as the Isuzu P-Up. That's not normal industry behavior. Manufacturers rebadge platforms they trust completely, ones they know won't generate warranty headaches under someone else's logo. Isuzu's simple overhead valve 4-cylinder and conventional leaf spring rear end gave GM exactly that confidence. A small truck reliable enough to risk an entire brand's reputation on. The era context lines up directly with the early 1970s shift towards smaller, cheaper trucks as fuel prices climbed. Isuzu's platform proved flexible enough to survive multiple corporate rebadges across nearly 2 decades without a fundamental redesign, running in mining fleets and municipal service vehicles worldwide well into the 1980s, specifically because downtime cost more than the truck itself. Owners today rarely distinguish between badges when shopping for parts, since so much of the drivetrain interchanges across Isuzu, Chevrolet, and later GM variants. That shared parts pool has quietly kept these trucks affordable to maintain decades after any of the 3 brands stopped supporting them directly. Fleet buyers in Southeast Asia and Latin America continued ordering Isuzu-built variants long after the GM rebadge relationship wound down, valuing the same simple mechanical layout that made the LUV arrangement possible in the first place. Did you know the Chevy LUV was actually an Isuzu underneath? Comment if this is new to you. Number 3. Datsun 620 pickup. Nissan sold the 620 on almost nothing but honesty. No turbo, no electronics, just an L-series overhead cam, 4-cylinder bolted to a simple leaf spring chassis, built to be fixed in a driveway rather than a dealership. That simplicity became the whole selling point once the 1973 oil crisis hit. American buyers wanted something small and fuel efficient, and the 620 delivered exactly that without asking owners to learn anything new about maintenance. Farmers and small contractors bought these specifically because a stalled 620 rarely meant a tow truck, usually just a wrench and 20 minutes. Nissan introduced the King Cab variant in 1976, adding a small rear bench years before. Extended cabs became standard across the industry, without touching the mechanical simplicity underneath. The formula barely changed for the rest of the decade because nobody found a genuine reason to complicate it. Surviving examples today are still commonly found, running on their original engines decades later, doing the same light-duty farm and ranch work they were built for in the first place. Rust remains the only real threat to a 620, not the drivetrain underneath it. Owners in dry climates across the American Southwest and Australia routinely report engines and transmissions still running strong on trucks whose bodies show every one of their decades outdoors. Nissan's parts catalog for the L-series engine stayed largely interchangeable across multiple vehicle lines for years afterward, meaning 620 owners today can often source rebuild parts from entirely unrelated Nissan models, rather than hunting for truck-specific components. Did your family run a 620 growing up? Tell us what finally retired it. Number 2. Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40. Toyota built the FJ40 from a captured Jeep, After the Second World War, Japanese forces recovered an abandoned American military four-wheel drive in the Philippines, and Toyota was tasked with reverse engineering a domestic equivalent from whatever parts existed. That project became the Land Cruiser, and by the 1970s, the FJ40 had matured into one of the toughest trucks ever mass-produced. The 1975 model year brought a 4.2-liter 2F inline-six, making 135 horsepower, paired with a genuine low-range 2-speed transfer case, giving crawling ability far beyond what the power figures suggest. Front disc brakes arrived in 1976. Nothing about the drivetrain was complex, which was exactly the point. Remote mining operations, government agencies, and militaries across Africa, the Middle East, and Australia standardized on the FJ40 throughout the decade because failure in genuinely remote terrain could be fatal. A broken FJ40 could usually be repaired by hand, with basic tools, by someone who wasn't a trained mechanic. Unlike more sophisticated rivals from the same years, production ran in the United States until 1983, and worldwide until 1984, with Brazilian Bandeirante versions continuing even longer. Owners today still run these on original engines, because there's remarkably little built to fail in the first place. Restoration shops across Japan, Australia, and the United States still treat the FJ40 as the benchmark for what a body-on-frame off-roader should be. Even heavily modified examples tend to keep the original chassis and drivetrain layout intact, because replacing either one rarely improves on what Toyota already got right the first time. Insurance data in export markets like Australia consistently shows FJ40 holding value better than nearly any other vehicle from the same era, driven almost entirely by owners who trust the drivetrain enough to keep buying replacement units instead of newer trucks. FJ40 owners, original drivetrain or long since swapped? Number 1, Mazda rotary pickup REPU. Mazda put a rotary engine in a pickup truck, and almost nobody remembers it happened. The REPU, short for rotary engine pickup, launched in 1974 running Mazda's 13B twin rotor engine, the same fundamental design powering the RX-3 and RX-4 sports cars, dropped into a conventional B-series truck bed and chassis built for 4-cylinder power. That decision looks backwards on paper. Rotary engines are light, compact, and spin freely at high RPM. Exactly the wrong personality for a work truck that needs low-end torque to haul lumber or tow a trailer. Mazda knew this. They built the REPU anyway, mostly to meet a specific market need: emissions. Conscious American buyers in the mid-1970s wanted something smaller and cleaner than a domestic V8 truck, and Mazda already had a rotary factory running at full capacity with nowhere else to put the output. The quiet toughness came from an unlikely source. Rotary engines have far fewer moving parts than a piston engine of comparable output. No valves, no camshaft, no timing chain to stretch and fail. What killed early rotary engines wasn't fragility, it was apex seal wear under sustained high RPM abuse, a problem that barely showed up in truck use, where the REPU spent most of its life at low, steady RPM hauling loads, rather than being redlined on a racetrack. Farmers and small businesses who bought these accidentally solved rotary reliability just by using the truck normally. The era context explains the timing. 1974 sat directly inside the first oil crisis, and Mazda's entire rotary lineup was under threat as fuel economy became the industry's only conversation. The REPU was Mazda's answer. Prove the rotary could work in a practical, everyday vehicle, not just a sports car chasing lap times. Production ended in 1977 after only around 15,000 units, a tiny number next to any conventional pickup of the same years, making surviving examples genuinely rare today. Most were driven hard as work trucks and scrapped decades ago. The ones still running are treated as rotary folklore, proof that Mazda's strangest engineering decision of the decade somehow ended up in the one vehicle built to survive it. Anyone ever seen one of these REPUs in person? Tell us where. 10 Japanese trucks, 4 decades of proof that simple beats complicated. If you had to daily drive one tomorrow, tell us which one in the comments and subscribe for more countdowns nobody else is covering.